So it'd be great to hear from you. So if you've been on a webinar with me before, you know that I'll ask you to be interactive. So although you can't speak, please do use the chat. Thank you, Emma in Bedford. Hello, well done for saying hi. Don't worry, I won't say it to everybody. There's about 100 people on here. But do please feel free to introduce yourselves and feel free to chat as we go through it and ask questions. Where possible, I'll answer the questions as I go through, or I'll come back and look at them at the end. So it just makes it a lot more interesting for everybody if we're able to join in together. And get involved. So get used to it, because I will be actually allowing us to chat as we go through, and I'll be asking various questions as we go through, and do feel free to get involved. So welcome to everybody. I've got someone from Zambia, Elizabeth. That seems to be the first one I've seen, but also Bulgaria. So we've got a multicultural mix of people here. And that's appropriate, because it doesn't matter where we are, there are always challenges for us to manage. Now, I've seen some familiar names on here, so some of you already know me, and I'll let you read through this. But I'll point a few elements out here. So my background is learning and development. I'm a trainer by background. I'm also a psychologist. Currently, my main role is founder and CEO of Actus Performance Management Software, but I also host a podcast. It's called the HR Uprising Podcast. And again, if you're not in HR, don't worry about it, because there are lots and lots of topics on that podcast which are suitable for managers. And I wanted to just take a moment to mention that we will be running a series of podcasts aimed directly at managers in September. So we'll mail out to our mailing list. If you're on this webinar, we've got your email address. So we'll let you know when that's live, and we'll be doing a series of 8 people management podcasts, again, that hopefully might be of value to you. The rest of it you can do yourself, but if you're interested in change, I'll come back to that at the end. And do please feel free to link in with me, look me up on Twitter, whatever your social media of choice is. It'd be great to connect with you, and you can access the podcast if you want to go to the HR Uprising website. That's probably one of the easiest ways to find us. So the purpose of this webinar is to go through the causes of underperformance, explore what might be causing underperformance and how that could be different in this virtual world, to talk about how we can set people up for success, because let's face it, none of us wants to be an underperformer, and we don't want to manage underperformance either. We'll talk about how we can give feedback and set clear expectations to help people to focus and perform well into the future. So that's what we're here to talk about. And here we go, straight into our first bit of interaction. A definition. So before I come up with a definition, what would you say is underperformance? And particularly, how would you recognize it in this virtual environment? So what are your thoughts on what underperformance is? And I guess you might have had to deal with that at the moment. So Corinne says, someone not doing what they're required to do. So they're not meeting the requirements of the job, let's say, or expectations, not meeting performance objectives or targets. So Lucy and Laura, missing deadlines, absolutely. Low standard of work. So although they're doing the work, it's not to the right quality. Not being able to hit targets, people being disengaged. That's interesting, isn't it? So that could be a low performance. So how do we know they're that, or is it more about the impact of that disengagement? So I can see lots about expectations, something about presenteeism. It's really hard to judge, isn't it, in a remote working environment, because people might be visible, but are they actually delivering the outputs? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have in a virtual environment, because how do we actually tell what people are doing? And perhaps in the old days, when we were sitting next to people, you'd kind of assume they were being productive because you could see them. Now we might know that people are there because they're there behind their Skype or their instant messenger, but are they actually delivering what we need? So we've also got other things, people not being productive, not performing to the level of their talent, says Sue. That's interesting, isn't it? So although they might be performing as well as the next person, but they could perform more. So we're not getting much out of them. Not following procedures, etc. Could be caused due to due health. So we're actually going into causes here, and all of those are very, very valid reasons. So if we were to say sustained underperformance, I would agree that everything you've done there, it's about not meeting expectations, targets, underperforming our job role. Something that is defined to me is not performing. And if we did it for a long time, it could end up in something which might be a capability or conduct issue. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go into this in great detail. I'm just flagging this because actually the purpose of this webinar is to avoid a capability or conduct issue. If you actually got to the point where somebody's performance, someone was unperforming to such an extent that they'd actually got to the point where you needed to take them down the disciplinary route, that's not fun for anybody. Anyone on here who's had that involvement won't enjoy having to do that. So we want to avoid this at all costs, but generally it goes down one of these two routes. If you had to discipline someone and ultimately sack them based on underperformance, you'd have had to say they either didn't have the capability, that despite training and giving them the skills and the clarity, they weren't able to perform, or it might be down to conduct issue, which is where the person was behaving in a way. Sometimes you see things like gross misconduct, which is actually straight out because they've breached your procedures. Now, the purpose of this is to avoid having to go down this route, because it's really a failure for everybody involved, and it's very time consuming and it's not pleasant. And that's what this webinar is about. And actually, forgive me, Helen, I'm just saying, I've just realized, have we recorded? If not, could you press record?
Yes, I've got the recording on.
Brilliant. See, Helen's a high performer there. She's on it there. On it. Thank goodness. I've got Helen there in the background. Thanks, Helen. So why are so many of us here wanting to talk about underperformance? One of the reasons that I decided to do this as one of our first manager webinars is that this is we've done 70 odd HR Uprising episodes, and managing underperformance is one of the highest. Once creating a culture or turning around a culture of performance is one of our most downloaded episodes. So I know it can be a pain point. So my question for you is, why do we find it so challenging? Why don't we want to do it? And feel free to put in the chat. Absolutely. David says to avoid conflict. Very few people like conflict, do they? And we don't like it. It makes us feel uncomfortable, difficult and awkward conversations. We don't know how to. It feels like confrontation. We don't like honest conversation. We're not used to them. It can be time consuming. It certainly can be time consuming once it's got to the point where the performance is at a low level, isn't it? So many people are saying it's time consuming. We don't feel confident, don't want to create a bad atmosphere, don't want to upset people. It's about avoiding conflict. I don't want them going off sick. Yes, and actually sometimes you can have cultures where people actually see performance management in the truest sense, as in telling people how to perform higher or to do better. They can actually see that as a criticism. So some cultures can have a tendency to react like that. So we want to try and manage this in a way that we don't get there, but certainly avoiding it is the worst thing. So I would agree that it's challenging to us as people because we have to be really quite direct, and we can find that that's uncomfortable. We might be worried about them biting back like the tiger. Most people prefer to avoid conflict. We want some harmony. We don't want to upset them or hurt their feelings. There might be the case that we realise that we might not have been clear in the first place. We might not have been specific about the goals or timelines. So we'd have to admit that maybe the problem was with us. We're fearful about how they might react, or we might have got stories in our head about why they're underperforming. We might think that, it's because they're a bad person or they're lazy and we're never going to make any difference. And so we almost feel, is it worth our while doing it? A few others here, yes, the manager, that's why I agree, Judy might feel that we're to blame, we shouldn't have brought them into the organisation, maybe fearful about legal repercussions or union repercussions. But the reality is those are things that we really do need to grasp the nettle. And why do I use the term grasp the nettle, just as a slight aside? Anyone know why we say grasp the nettle? Most people would say, what happens if you brush against a nettle, as opposed to if you if you took a nettle leaf and you took it between your thumb and forefinger and grasped it. They do sting, but actually, I didn't know this until someone told me. If you actually get a nettle apparently on the top and the bottom of the leaf between your thumb and forefinger, it doesn't sting. If you actually grasp it firmly, you don't get stung. It's if you brush against it, you get stung. So it's quite a nice metaphor, because actually if we beat around the bush and we don't talk to people about it, if we're not in the habit of just being direct about things as and when it's needed, what happens is the performance issue builds up and it gets worse. The person may not realize they're underperforming, and maybe it gets more and more of a problem, and you end up having to get stung, as in it's a really long, time-consuming issue. Lindsay's term, you want to nip issues in the bud. I would say that actually that is the real key, is if you can spot things and move on them, be brave in the moment, then actually it's really interesting. We can turn performance around quite rapidly. Now, before I go into managing it further, I'd also say that if at all possible, create an environment where feedback is normal. So if you go out of your way to catch people doing things right as much as possible, when, giving people recognition, recognizing when they're doing a great job, if you then have to tell them when they're not doing such a great job, they're not going to feel quite so criticized. You are lessening that likelihood of them turning around and biting. And also it won't feel quite so painful to them because they're in the habit, they trust you because you give them regular feedback. So actually one of the main things as a line manager is getting into the habit of giving regular feedback. There's a book called The 1 Minute Manager, which is about 25 years old. It says 1 minute, giving people 1 minute praisings and 1 minute reprimands. And it's a bit old fashioned, but actually the principle is the same. So if you're in the habit of giving regular positive feedback, then it's not so difficult to say when things are less appropriate, and actually you get much better, a better response to it. So the key we say is it is worth grasping the nettle. It's much less painful in the long run for everybody. And what we need to do in order to do that, we need to be tough on the facts, but open-minded on the potential causes. I can see that many of you have come up with, there are lots of causes that are very legitimate and out of people's control, for example, around their working environment, that might have been caused recently as a result of the new way of working. So, you've got the things like environmental circumstances where we've all had to try and do our best with children at home, or we might be working in a setup that's not that conducive to us working effectively. So it absolutely can be tricky in terms of that, and it's about being tough on the facts, therefore, but open-minded on the potential causes. And again, that might require us as managers to get really clear about facts. Sometimes we're not brilliant at noticing specifics, and we may not see them. They may be even less visible. It's more of a feeling of underperformance or a suspicion that we get when we're remote. So we really have to learn to be quite tough on what the facts are, but not jump into conclusions about why people are behaving in that way. And I can see there's nice comments here, which I agree. It can feel that people don't accept feedback and think the manager's just wanting them out. Again, Karen, I guess if we're in a habit of maybe giving people positive reinforcement first, then there's more trust there in the first place, not just negative. Dev's saying we need to be clear from the start on standards. Absolutely. And underperformance could be part of a much larger puzzle. Absolutely. Those are all examples of being open-minded there. So what sort of causes, you've already said some of these things, might cause underperformance in your view. So it could be part of a much larger puzzle. Liam, what do you think would be other parts of that puzzle? I say from Deb is saying, actually, we need to have clear expectations. You might need training and development. Those sort of things that might be a cause of underperformance. I mentioned things that might be caused by our environment that could cause underperformance. Lack of trust. So if people don't feel trusted, and that's a bit of a chicken and egg one, isn't it, Penelope? So, people don't feel trusted, they might underperform, they don't perform, they don't feel trusted. So you have that kind of piece there where you've got a catch-22, and we need to try and break it as managers. Because that's got lack of clarity, 100%. Physical working environment, lacking motivation. People don't know what good looks like. So you're really rattling through those here. Demotivation, lack of skills, toxic atmospheres, so the environment. This one here, isolation fatigue, burnout, caused by working remotely for too long, absolutely. Poor communication. So there's lots of personal issues, lots and lots of things here could be caused which are nothing to do with the individual. The employee could have something going on out of work that's having an impact. Lots of things there, all really, really valid, completely agree. So on that note then, of those ideas that you've come up with, I think are valid, I've categorized them into this KISS model or CIS model. So a lot of underperformance is caused by lack of clarity. So lack of clear expectations, KPIs, lack of goals, lack of timelines, just lack of clarity that the way in which I need to work may not apply. I might see someone else acting a certain way and think it's okay for me to act that way. So I don't have clarity about the expectations for my role or my objectives. The second one, it might be that the individual has become demotivated, demoralized, that they just don't want to do the job. So they're actually choosing, it is actually a can't work. It's interesting, that one, because quite often people think that they can't do something, but is that the most common cause? And great, you're already voting. So we've got a poll up here. I'm interested to see which one you think is the most common cause. And I wonder whether it's changed a bit during lockdown. The third one could be, do they not know how to do the job, or have they not been shown or trained how to do the job? And the fourth one is about surrounding environment. So it might be that the culture is toxic, as someone said earlier, or everyone around you is behaving in a certain way. Let's say everyone behind you takes 2 hours for lunch, therefore I'm going to take 2 hours for lunch. Or it could be in the sort of working from home, it could be that I've got so many distractions in my environment that I can't do anything about, or I'm really uncomfortable sitting at my desk, or whatever. So there could be things there that, whereas previously it might have been more about the working environment, I think there are things that have been introduced by working remotely. So go for it, do vote. Well done, 73% of you vote already. Let's see which one you think are the most common cause of underperformance, and then we'll close the poll and share with you what it is that you believe. And I'm interested, if you've gone for individual attitude or will, I'm interested to know what you think about that as to what might is it because they're demotivated, their attitude, confidence. We've got anything there around that one, any extra perspective. Go on with 77%. We'll stop it when we get to 80%. So come on, they've got 120 people have voted. There's still 30 of you. You can eat your lunch and vote. Let's see what we're going to get. Can we get up to 80% votes? Nearly there, nearly there, nearly there. We'll count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We've hit 80%, and we'll share the poll so you can see what everyone else voted as well. So yes, so 54% of you said that you think it's down to clarity. 27% of you think it's down to individual attitude or will, which is an interesting one to explore. 11% think it could be skill or knowledge, and 7% think it could be surrounding environment. So I think that is really brilliant and really insightful, because my experience is that clarity tends to be the most common one. And you know what? That is great, but also not so good. It depends on how we look at it. Amy, let's just look at this. It's not my fault, it's COVID, says Claire. Yes, there can be people who play the victim, and I can see that happens. Amy did a survey, and working from home was not the issue where there was trust and good communication. As long as you had that, it continued and continued. Not engaged or inspired. So yes, so you guys are commenting on the individual attitude and will. So I'm going to go through each of those in turn. I'm going to pick up with what you're saying, and I really like your comments there. It could be about poor fit. The key really that I'd flag out of all of those comments is that, and I mean, if I ask it to you as a question, who can affect this the most? Is it the manager or is it the individual? And whose gift is it who can do this? And I'm seeing a few things. So we're seeing both. I'm seeing manager and individual both. I am seeing both of them. And I think often it can be that we think as the line manager it's someone else's fault, but actually clarity in particular, I would say, is one of the strongest ones that we as a line manager have responsibility for giving. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think the individual should speak up and should say if they aren't clear about something. But if we aren't, if we're not setting, giving clear milestones, and I think again during lockdown it was actually really, really important to, and where people are working virtually, to keep re-clarifying goals and objectives. So annual goals and objectives, they were never great, but even quarterly goals and objectives, it's not frequent enough. So we needed to be talking to people on a frequent enough basis that we're refining, we've got agile goals, we're updating our milestones, and we're clarifying what's expected. So if people haven't got clarity, and say arguably the most common cause, you guys would agree with that, it's often down to a lack of clear goals, objectives and milestones. So if you've got someone in your team and you think that they're not performing, the first place to start has to be with clear expectations. And I'm not talking about putting them on a performance improvement plan. I would just do it really clear to actually check they do understand what their priorities are, what the deadlines are, and then if they don't perform, then you might have to go on to performance improvement plan. So look first to yourself as line manager, in my opinion, and think, actually, have I been clear? Or are you someone like me, and given I've got 2 people on this call who report into me, could I be guilty of confusing things because I've got so many changing priorities? Is it something that I need to do that's maybe affecting people's performance, and take some responsibility there? In terms of the second one, individual attitude or skill, which was the second one that you suggested was the right way forward, sometimes you do hear people, more so I used to hear it, they go, oh, they just don't want to do it, they're just a bad egg, that person, and almost we'd judge them. And that's not being tough on the facts, but we judge them without being open-minded. So we're thinking that they're choosing not to perform. But there may be an outside cause. It could be, as we've said already, it could be they're not clear. It could be they're not motivated. Well, if they're not motivated, why aren't they motivated? Is it because they're in the wrong job? Or is it because they're bored, or they're tired, they're not being challenged enough, they've not bought into the organization, they haven't been excited or inspired? Now, a lot of those, I'm not saying again that we can only do so much as line managers, but have we tried to understand that as that person as an individual? Do we know what they enjoy in a job, and are we doing our best to make sure that at least part of their role is things that they enjoy? The other one, and I put it in orange because I think this is something we do need to be alert to, is that there are often things outside of the individual that might be causing underperformance, and I think there's going to be more mental illness than ever before, people suffering from stress, anxiety out there, so we need to be quite tolerant, perhaps where we think it's an individual thing, and find out ways to try and uncover it and support people. I'm going to read your chat in a moment. It's there. I can't talk and chat. So Corinne's saying, this is what happened to someone in my team. Okay, so the individual wasn't challenged. Okay, that is so that was the case where the individual wanted more clarity, the manager didn't deliver, and the individual went. So that is a failure of the organization, and that's the failure of the line manager. Now, again, don't get me wrong, line managers, we know something like 35% of line managers in the UK get the training they need. And hats off to all of you being here. Actually, this is maybe something that gives you some tools for your toolkit. You know, it's not the line manager's fault necessarily. They don't always have the skills and development, but there is stuff that we can take on here, and it is good for us to have that awareness. If it's about skill, the training, maybe that person hasn't been shown how to do something, so they're unable to use the learning management system properly because they don't know how to use it. They haven't been shown how to do it. They're doing a long way round, so it's taking them a lot longer to do something that might have done. So they haven't received sufficient or effective instructional training. The other possibility is they might have had training that wasn't suitable or effective. Sometimes to get good at something, we need to have a chance to practice in a safe environment. So they may not have been able to do that, and they feel too nervous to practice. Therefore, their fear is holding them back, and they're not developing the skill. Only in exceptional circumstances, in which case, let's say they were the wrong fit for the job, they actually don't have the capability to take on the skill having been trained. And that might be one of the rare instances where you might have to go down the capability route, unless, of course, you could move them into another role where their skills are a better fit. And then the final one is our surrounding environment. So I say that was the least common one that you came up with, and I think it is the least common one normally. It's sometimes the excuse to go, well, I thought it was okay because everyone else is doing it, that they might be performing in a certain way. But I do think there are some environmental factors out at the moment in terms of our virtual setups that could make life a little bit more difficult for people. So I've got a scenario here. Sarah was late 3 times. They're very simplistic scenarios just for ease here. So if Sarah was late onto the video call 3 times last week, what might be the cause of this? And let's say, you might be thinking, oh, well, that's, they're lazy, or they don't want to do it. IT issues, absolutely. You could find they can't get on, something's happening there. They don't know how to get onto the technology, internet problems, tech problems, children problems. Anything until you don't know until you ask. So lots and lots of legitimate issues, particularly in these circumstances, not allowing that might have been out of their control. Now there are certain ones here. There could also be something where they're not allowing enough time. So why are they not? Are they not organised, or are they really back-to-back busy, or are they just not? They've got bad time management. So there's lots there, and it's you could have some of these technology issues, but 3 times. So you might think you've got to do this. So let's say this has happened, and I'm not saying managers are not perfect either, but there you've got, they were late onto that video call. We don't know what the reason is. It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It doesn't mean that they're lazy, but certainly it might not have been acceptable. So we should still maybe have a conversation with them about it. Oops. And what I would say here is that if we are going to talk about something, and bear in mind this is a bit of a light performance issue, if you like, normally what you'd want to do is you'd want to start by, I call it drawing a line in the sand, just being straight with the person, in the context that we are generally positive, so they don't just get negative feedback from us, but start with a statement about the behavior, not the person. Sarah, I noticed you were late three times, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday last week onto the team call. The problem with that was that actually it meant that we were all waiting for you. We weren't sure if you're actually going to join. What's going on? Is there a problem or something going on at home? Just wondering what the cause was of that. Now, you could actually ask the cause first. You don't have to say impact. You could then talk the impact later. Maybe listen to the cause might be better. You can choose based on how critical the issue was. And then once you understand the cause, then you can talk about solutions, because of course the cause could be any one of the things that you've put up here. And if it is a massive technical issue, you go, oh gosh, okay, so how are we going to solve this? Do you need to come into the office to be able to work? Do we need to give you a personal hotspot to be able to help you? If it's childcare focused, again, we're in certainly strange times at the moment. Historically, that would have been irrelevant and into the business, and that would be for the worker to sort out. But right now, we have to be much more tolerant to childcare issues and look at the whole person. But the key is thinking, well, how can we solve this? Because actually, it doesn't really work if you are going to have to be late regularly for this. What do we need to do? Because the impact on others isn't appropriate. So I agree, Laura, absolutely. So come up with solutions and ask them what they could do to solve it. So the conversation might have been, I noticed you were 10 minutes late. I'm really sorry, I forgot the time, sales call, blah, blah, blah. The key is we need to still be straight about it. We don't say, oh, okay, it doesn't matter. It is if it is something worth raising, and it's down to you to decide how important it is and actually how legitimate the excuse is. But if it was, oh, I forgot, or it's a little bit weak, then you need to tell them the impact and say, look, it is really important that you logged on a few minutes in advance for future team meetings, or at least can you message me if you're going to be late? Those sort of things. If you're going to have the line in the sand, that would be something where you have to say, I'm just going to be clear about this is the impact, and this is what my expectations are for the future. So it's, they're not a bad person. All they did was they logged on late a few times. That is not who they are. It's just the behavior. That behavior doesn't work because it didn't work for everyone else. And then, yes, of course, matter closed. Then you've got to listen to, is there any extra anything else going on behind the scenes? Sometimes someone might hesitate. Maybe they've not told you the whole story. And we might need to listen further. Now, bear in mind, for me giving you an example like this, it's a bit blunt, and really you've got to use your interpersonal skills. And absolutely, Julie's saying, get them to be part of the solution, get them to take responsibility 100%. It's about building and retaining trust. That's another nice model that Andrew's saying, yeah, example, effect, change. That's another way of doing it, the EEC example there. But the point is that if it's worth raising, it's worth talking about the impact, and it's worth agreeing a solution. And that solution that is agreed, it needs to be something that's firm. That is your line in the sand. And it is worth, with line in the sand conversations, making sure it's documented, not formally, but make sure it's captured. So whether you pop it over on Skype or an email and say, look, just say we did have this chat, and make sure that in future you are going to be doing this differently. Why is it important to document that informal line in the sand? Why do you want to have it written down somewhere? If you've got a system, then we have a system that interacts one-to-one, so you could capture it as a one-to-one. Liam says, clarity, absolutely right. Total clarity, because then if it happens again, you actually might decide to go formal, or you come back and go, actually, we need to change this. Now, bear in mind that was something that most people could solve, but it could be something which is a capability issue. So you need to do it. So you've got a record of that conversation. And this is, I know that there are HR people on, this is one of the biggest frustrations for HR people that I ever work with, is they'll have line managers occasionally come to them and say, so-and-so, I need to discipline them. They need to go down the disciplinary process. And the HR person will say, oh, okay, so what's the problem? And they'll explain what the problem is, and they're not performing. And they'll say, okay, so do they know they're not performing? And then the line manager quite often squirms a bit then. And they say, okay, so they say, well, yeah, I've spoken to them about it. And say, okay, so is there a record of you having spoken to them about it? I.e., is the line in the sand documented? And a lot of the time there isn't. And the problem with that is it means you have to start again. Because there's a very high chance that the line manager cannot evidence that they were clear with the person. And if we weren't clear with the person, we're not fair to the person, and therefore you cannot take them down the disciplinary process. So, occasionally there are times where you do want to discipline someone and exit the business, but that takes way longer than you needed it to because there's no documentation in the first place. So we do need to document that, but informally. Yeah, so managers tend not to put these sort of things in writing because it feels more formal. And I think this is the whole thing. It's being formal about an informal conversation. There's lots of routes in which you can capture stuff now. It could even be on a Skype. Just remember that we've had this, we've agreed this. I prefer, if you have, one of the reasons though is perhaps because we're not great at documenting things anyway. So if you're having regular one-to-ones, and again, this is something that I would advocate more so where we're working virtually, is having those regular one-to-ones. Are you capturing things, whether they are on a Google Keep with a date line to it, whether it's on your Skype group, can you do such and such by then, or if it's in a formal one-to-one system or as part of an appraisal. If you're documenting things business as usual, it doesn't feel so formal. But maybe therefore, again, it's about us stepping up our clarity and documenting things more often. Yeah, as Kelsey says, if it's not recorded, it didn't happen. But it doesn't have to be negative. It's something that if we do it business as usual, but bearing in mind, this is about nipping stuff in the bud. And the clearer we are, the more likely it is that the behavior is going to change. And, it's all positive, it's done. But sometimes, particularly right now, we might think there's more to it than, she said, oh, I'm sorry, the kids, or there was technical issues. There's something where they're kind of brushing something off, but there might be something more. So we do need to have our well-being radar switched on. We need to be prepared to be flexible and understanding without being a pushover, of course, because there are people that will take advantage, but it's the minority. So we need to have one-to-one relationships with our people and to have trust so that they will open up to us if there's a real issue. Even if it is a bit personal or it's going to go on for a while, if they tell us, then we can help. If we feel out of our depth, as in we think it might be a mental health issue, then we might want to involve other experts. And we want to be consistent though. However, that doesn't mean we should avoid the line in the sand. So it's about being courageous because it's better for everybody all round. And it might be that there is something going on behind the scenes you can help them with. So just suggestions there that you might want to say, I noticed you hesitated. It would help if you shared what's going on. I'm happy to talk in confidence. Or you were late onto team calls last week. This is unlike you. Is something wrong? Or do you want me to see if someone from HR Occupational Health can help? Again, what we're doing is we're grasping the nettle in a fair way and with the best interests of that person in mind. The key is here being clear about the line in the sand. The EEC model that Andrew put up earlier, it works nicely as well. Expectations. This one here, PEG, is one which I've come across, which is just about saying, so this is what's going on currently. So what's the current level of performance? P stands for performance. What are my future expectations about things? So this is where we are currently. This is what I expect in future. That, matter of course, we're logged on a couple of minutes before the webinar, or you let us know if you're going to be late. And the gap is, how do we close the gap? So we'd ask them for suggestions. Now, the example I chose was a bit of a tell, and it's a bit of a simplistic one. So actually, we're talking about something now, I noticed that the report that you brought in perhaps wasn't up to scratch, or it might be something about standards. So James, the report that you provided last week, it had a number of typos on it, to such an extent that I had to proofread it and correct it before I could send on to the client. Now the problem with that is it actually took me almost an hour and I had to work at the weekend. Now, this is just tell at the moment. You would expect this to be a dialogue and you'd listen to James. The expectation, so but on my slide, I'm just going to go into expectation. Ideally, we would have client reports to have been proofed before they're sent over to me. So if you do need help from me in future, I need you to give me 24 hours notice, or could you make sure it's been proofed? And then the gap here, this has been couched more as an ask. So how can we ensure that reports have been proofed in advance going forward? So you are involving them in the solution. Now, you don't have to go PEG just because it's a mnemonic. Use something that feels natural and it's conversational, but the point is being really clear about where we are currently, what the expectation is, and agreeing how we're going to close that gap and documenting that. Okay, so Lisa's saying, what if they, so someone here, sorry Lisa, I was using your name, but if someone had dyslexia or a disability, so that is potentially a legitimate reason why we might struggle to proofread ourselves. In that case, I'd say that's fine. Someone can have dyslexia, and but how do we? I'm not saying that you have to proof it. How can we ensure that when it gets to me, that it has been proofed? So it might be that we send it on to Helen, who will proof it, or if you need me to proof it, you give me warning that it's coming and give me notice. So it's not about judging that person's skill there necessarily. I'm not saying that they have to have done it. What I'm saying is that the output, we need to make sure it goes to the client, or it needs to be proofed by the time I get it. So I'm just going to look at a few questions here that are coming in here. Yeah, handwritten notes, Jackie says, the handwritten notes of the data in the brief summary is enough if you're going to a tribunal. I would argue that it's not great for clarity though. So I think it is better to make it look a bit formal, by putting a note to the person, so the person realizes that you've said it, because that's more about the manager covering their back, I suppose, but actually it's better to have it. If there's multiple problems, you'd have one conversation about a trend. You don't want people to feel harassed. I would totally agree with that, because it may well be a mental health issue or something going on. It's more, I'm concerned there's been a few things going on, and you may give a few examples. Absolutely. That said, again, it is about balance. We need to catch people doing things right. Presumably, these people are doing good things as well, finding positive things too. I'm just reading Jarlath's one here. Yeah, so research suggests that one team catch-up and 2 short one-to-one catch-ups per week works very well in the current situation. It's definitely about horses for courses, but we do need to be ready to jump on calls more frequently and have those more regular catch-ups, and I think shorter-term objectives are quite key. When is a quality issue? How do you do that when it's a quality issue? Usually it's this report's not structured, not missing, things in the wrong place. So Nicola, again, open-minded on the cause of that one, but I would suggest that is actually, it could be a training or a clarity issue. So if they haven't been trained how to do a report, so have they been given an example of a perfect report with the right structure? I'm thinking, kids at school are taught things like Peter paragraphs, whatever, have they been given a structure to follow? And if they have been given instruction they're not following, then they've got the clarity, they've got the training, then it's a choice thing. So they need to go, I need you to follow that structure. So we need to understand what is the cause. Do they not know how to do it? Have they not been trained? And therefore we give them the benefit of the doubt to make sure they have clarity, they have training. Then if they don't do it, then it's a will piece. Nicola says yes repeatedly. Okay, well then I think maybe then that comes in, that does come a line in the sand conversation. It is, Fred, I've told you I need you to use Peter paragraphs or reason. You remember the report that I showed you that you need to follow. I noticed the report that you sent me last week. It did have things missing in this paragraph. In fact, you'd highlighted these things that were in the wrong place, and you had to go back and say, actually, going forwards, I do expect you to follow this feedback, and you document it. And if it's still repeatedly, it's like, why is this repeatedly happening? And you say, I'm going to have to look at this as a capability issue if you continue to do it. So sometimes with a line in the sand conversation, you get to the point where you say, I have repeatedly told you this. You agree that I've repeatedly told you this. I've provided the clarity. I've provided the training. If I get a piece of information like this again, I will have to involve HR or take it more formally. So then that becomes your line in the sand conversation. So you're saying refer to next stage. So you have to be a bit formal about it in that circumstances to get them to take you seriously. So the point here is try to be a perform people manager. I'm into my mnemonics today, aren't I? We've had 3 in this webinar. I made this one up. This is something that we've written an ebook out. It's actually being turned into PDF as we speak. We will let you know when it's available. And what we've just talked about on this podcast is the M for managed performance. So the information we've covered, we actually have a white paper which summarizes this, and actually we'll send it out to you guys because you've come on this anyway. So we'll send it out when, so you've got it anyway, which refers back to some of the models that I've been talking about. We've got an infographic as well. But all of those, the before bit is really important. That actually comes first. The best way to prevent underperformance is by knowing our people, building trust and showing that we care. The next best way is about building on that with expectations and clarity. Then we need to provide regular reviews. And as someone said on the list, actually frequent feedback. Virtual is fine, but we need to talk more frequently and it needs to be consistent. And if we're giving feedback on something that needs to change, we should document it. So that's regular review, give feedback, coach for accountability, ask people for suggestions. If they're not thinking, what is it? How can we solve this? You know, it doesn't work. You continuing to give me a report which needs to be rewritten. How can we solve this? Actually, is this person a really valued member of the team, but they're useless at reports? Could we get somebody else to do their reports if you want to keep them, right? You know, does this person have other skills? In which case, maybe this bit just doesn't fit their skill set. Recognition, so that when they do receive the feedback, that they do feel that they are valued, so they get positive feedback as well. So look for reasons to find people doing things right. But with regards to managing underperformance, be prepared to nip performance issues in the bud. So there'll be more on that you can get. And HR aren't the bad guys. I'll involve HR. Yeah, I know, but it does work, doesn't it? We've got to involve them early, yes. But actually, I would say I'm going to have to be more formal about this. I will have to take this down a formal route if I have to bring it up again. So we need to be firm. It's really about that. And say lots of HR people saying, but don't use HR as a threat. It's actually about the managers managing performance and being fair. And actually, is there something that I'm doing that's not helping you? Is there something else we can do about it? How do we solve this problem together? Lots of pleas from HR going, we're not weapons. HR are lovely people. Totally. But this is a manager's responsibility. It is a manager's responsibility. We should be preventing things from going to HR. So I've got one final poll, actually. In terms of, we know that the research that actually line managers aren't necessarily given the development that they need. And I was interested in this if I was going to build future webinars that might be useful to line managers, what those topics might be. And by all means, if you know what the topics need to be, please put them in the comments. I'd love to know what you think would be useful. You can vote, I think, to more than one on this. Is this a multi-choice one, Helen? But I'm interested here in which people skills do you think managers need the most support in developing? And I think you can try and vote for, let's say you can choose your top 3, and just would be interested to know what you think the challenges are for line managers out there at the moment, how to do various things.
I'm not sure if it is multiple choice. I can't remember.
Okay,
sorry.
I can't remember. Sorry if it's not. Choose your most important one. That's it. Keep voting, guys. I'm going to read down the things. You can only choose one. Okay, guys. So you just have to choose your top one. So we're saying here, this culture, David says that sometimes people are fearful of making mistakes, 100%. So if we trust, if we have a culture of trust, then people can make a mistake and also they can admit to it, or they can ask for help. And that's the key. Conflict management, says Jackie. So do we mean different conflict, if people come to them with conflict, as opposed to this where we're saying actually we feel uncomfortable, sort of overt conflict where someone is coming to them or a customer conflict? Love to know more about that, Jackie. How to manage talent or develop them would be helpful for people. We've got here as a suggestion. Yeah, I think that's a reality, that lots of people have got technical managers who don't necessarily, they've risen into a management job without necessarily even wanting to be a line manager. They're passionate about their job role, but not actually about people management. And that's definitely something, that's a reality. However, if they are in a line management role, they're taking the pay for that, then they do have a responsibility to manage or go into a different role and let someone who is a manager. HR partners, referring to them does not mean all is lost. Yes, draw on these guys for support. I hope that HR people are passing out things like these webinars to people to help them. Often there'll be training, or they can guide you or advise you. You could even have a dry run if you've got to have a difficult conversation with somebody, with your HR colleague. Great. Okay, so that's interesting what we think this area. So setting clear objectives and milestones is something that people find hard. It is interesting. You know, everybody knows what SMART stands for, but every time I run a session on it, they find it incredibly hard to write a clear SMART objective and milestones. It's harder than you think. and then how to deliver structured and regular follow-up and feedback. So giving good quality feedback, those skills there. So we'll probably look to we will have podcasts on these topics, and we have already got content on this as well, which we can maybe put some of the links in our follow-up if we get a chance to find them, guys. We'll do a follow-up as business as usual. We will send you a link to this video so that you can access it, and I'll make the slides available if they're useful to you. And we've got some other links to relevant information that you can download. So it might not come out to you till tomorrow, so we'll have a chance to look at the other information that might help you, but keep an eye out. I'll look to do webinars on this topic, on those topics for you going forwards as well. So I'll end the polling there. Thanks for sharing those, guys. Thank you, Sue. Thanks for joining. And I'm just going to go on to my final-ish slide. The key to remember is that no one joins a company wanting to underperform. They don't join wanting to be an underperformer. So we shouldn't ever think it's about the person. These are unprecedented times with many circumstances that are out of people's control, and that is going to be affecting performance and well-being. As line managers, we must be alert to the part that we might play in underperformance. And I guess as HR, we should be alert to how we can help line managers be alert to that fact and give them those skills. And the relationships that we build now, actually lockdown has been a massive opportunity to build trust and relationships, to go away from presenteeism and more to managing on outputs. And if we can build those relationships, we're going to have higher loyalty and performance into the future. So yes, we will be sending you out the slides. Interested guys in the chat, is there anything that you would take from this that you're going to apply? I'd love to know what was useful to you and what you might do. We will send you the slides, we'll send you the recording. David's going to use Peg. I'd love to hear from what you're going to do there. So keep on putting there. If there are any questions or anything you want to apply, please add it into the recording, into the chat. The chat's not on there. We'll capture that. We will send these out to you, and I'm just going to finish a few slides. Do feel free to disappear if you need to, or ask questions if you want me to handle any questions personally. I'm happy to do that. If anyone out there is involved in managing change, and that could be a line manager or HR, the book that I wrote has now been converted into a virtual training program. There's more information on there. You can look at the link and you can access it. And if you are interested, we've got a 50% early bird discount available right now. So that makes me aware there. Have we got any jobs available? Possibly, depends what you want to do. And then future webinars. So keep an eye on this, because we will be adding our autumn series of webinars. Some of the information you've said about what would be helpful. If you know what you'd like to see more of on a webinar, suggest it to me, because I'm taking ideas from you. On the 10th of September, that is going to be how do we adapt to the challenges of a hybrid workplace. So it's about the people and performance management now. It's not just virtual, is it? It's not virtual, it's not remote. Sorry, it's not purely virtual, it's not purely office-based, it's a bit of both. So we're going to think about how can we have this, because that's bringing different challenges about teams being in different places. And then more of an HR one, if you want to do an HR L&D balanced scorecard, and there will be 2 happening in October, November, and probably 2 in December. So do keep an eye out. Thanks. Caitlin has shared our upcoming webinars. Yeah, go and try grasping the nettle for real, being brave out there. So thanks everybody for joining, and thank you for being so interactive as ever. I will keep it open for a little bit. There's various links we'll provide you with. There's my links here. Feel free to disappear or feel free to ask any questions or suggest future topics. Oh my gosh, Callan has gone to manage the flood in the factory. Oh dear. Hope that's not too drastic. We've got all the links coming through if any of you just want to click in and link in. Thanks, Caitlin. That's really helpful. Just pop them in the chat. Oh, thank you, Hayley. It's so nice that you chat, guys, because otherwise it can feel so anonymous. So here we go. Laura's got a question. How do we tackle the problem where the person is so keen to please and be centre of attention, they cause a toxic atmosphere, not intentionally and not even aware? Oh, that's almost like the BO one, isn't it? Of course, we don't have troubles with that anymore with remote working. I think that is a behavioural feedback conversation, and you would use something like the telling people about the impact, the impact of something. So it might be you need to come up with a few specific examples. So you know, I noticed that you commented on our recent chat. you commented 5 times more than anybody else, but be specific as opposed to exaggerating like I am there. And you need to probably have 2 or 3 different examples, and you might want to say, it's absolutely fantastic that you're so keen. Unfortunately, though, remote workplace, we're not giving everybody the opportunity to communicate. So perhaps find a way to give them that feedback in a way of tell them about the potential impact of it, and just ask them to water it down a bit. Or maybe they're trying really hard. You could also explore what the causes might be. So why is that? They're really keen. There are always people on a training course who want to answer every question. The keen beans, it's often, they mean well, understand what the motivation is. Do they need a bit of reassurance? It might be saying, actually, what you're doing is a really, really strong job. What you need to do is perhaps just step back a bit and let other people contribute, and suggest some other ways in which they can do it. Corinne, I haven't got a Facebook group at the moment, but what I do have is a LinkedIn group. I don't know if you're on there. I may do a Facebook group in future, but there's the HR Ninjas Facebook group, which is pretty active, and I haven't necessarily linked up with other ones. But we have an Actus page, but we won't rule it out. You think you want to be well liked and it backfires. Yeah. So I think it is be friendly as a conversation, and say, just think, need to give other people the opportunity to contribute. And you might be careful, because actually maybe you come over as trying a little bit too hard. Come up with a nice friendly way of trying to, it's not really performance, is it, but actually they're going to make themselves unpopular. So if you could be kind enough to have a quiet word and just sort of subtly say you might want to water it down a bit, with a few examples of what they could do a bit less of, that might work well. David's saying if they had better feedback from the manager, they wouldn't feel the need to try so hard. Absolutely right. It may be unconsciously they are needy. We do all have the needy people, and sorry, that sounds like a pejorative term, but the reality is, we've all got different personalities. Okay, so I have people in my team who are much more people-oriented and probably prefer more feedback than I naturally prefer, because I'm a bit more task-motivated, and I have to remember that it's my job as manager to recognize that actually they need more recognition just because that's how they are, and vice versa. If you are a manager who likes to gush quite a bit, not everybody wants that. So this is about understanding different behaviors. There's a tool called the SDI, which is quite useful, and I'll talk about it on one of the podcasts soon, actually. Yeah, check out Corinne. HR Uprising is one of the great ways to interact with us. That's probably a really good place. And doesn't matter, you don't have to be HR, and we are on all of their channels there. And I'm happy to chat on social media directly.